2001 Scholar in Residence series is sponsored by the Allen and Tybal Smith Kahn Scholar in Residence Fund at Congregation Bethel. The fund was established in 2012 by Rabbi Kahn and his family in memory of his parents, Allen and Tybal Smith Kahn, to honor their memory and to perpetuate the values most precious to them. This year's Scholar in Residence program honors Rabbi Kahn, celebrating his 14 years of service to our congregation. From compiling and editing original Shabbat and High Holy Day prayer books, through finding and reinterpreting Midrashic and Hasidic texts, and presenting poetry from diverse contemporary authors, Rabbi Kahn has sought to expand and deepen how we understand and explore Jewish prayer and spiritual practice. This Scholar in Residence program brings three of Rabbi Kahn's beloved teachers and friends to Bethel. Each one is an inspiring teacher, and in different ways, each has answered Rabbi Abraham Isaac Cook's call to renew the old and sanctify the new. We're pleased this evening to have poet Dan Bellm as our speaker, speaking on the spiritual life of poetry, practice, protest, prayer. As most of you already know, Dan is a poet, writer, and translator. He teaches poetry and literary translation for Antioch University, Los Angeles, MFA Creative Writing Program. He's published 4 books of poetry, most recently Deep Well and Practice, the winner of a 2009 California Book Award. Each poem in practice is matched to a specific weekly Torah portion. Much of the poetry we've come to appreciate over the years at Bethel was either selected by Dan or in some cases written by him. Many of us have enjoyed his poetry sessions on Yom Kippur and other special occasions. A member of Congregation Bethel, Dan Bellm will celebrate his 40th anniversary with our beloved Rabbi Yoel Kahn in June. Please, if you have questions or comments, either hold them until after the conclusion of Dan's presentation and the rabbi's comments, or if you prefer, you can enter them into the chat. And now we'll turn my microphone off and turn the camera and the microphone over to Dan.
Okay, thank you so much, Susan, and thank you everyone for being here. It's an honor to share this virtual world with you tonight. So yes, as you know, for the past 14 years, I've held the highly demanding and highly unpaid, I might add, post of chief consultant in poetry for Rabbi Kahn. And so you've seen some of the poetry I have gathered over the years, now and then a piece by yours truly. So I thought in honor of my retirement from that post, and incidentally, Rabbi Kahn's retirement, since I gather he's retiring too, I've really just prepared a gathering of poems for us this evening. More than a talk, I think of it as, you know, a kind of a stroll among friends. And we'll see where it leads us. I've promised you some practice, protest, and prayer, and I think I will have some of each, but I'll begin and end with prayer. And there's, of course, so much poetry to draw from. We could either spend a year or we could spend an hour. So for now, we'll spend an hour. And it's really because we're not only the people of the book, but we're a nation of poets. You know, from the very beginning, our tradition is steeped in metaphor, starting with the chaos, the tohu vabohu, the preceded creation, you know, the darkness over the face of the deep, and the ruach Elohim, the wind or spirit or breath from God sweeping over the face of the waters. We think of our Sabbath as a bride. We conceive of our fates as being written in the book of life and subject to the opening and closing of gates. We speak in metaphor. Our prophets speak in verse, calling forth justice to roll down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. And often they prophesy quite darkly, and at other times, like Isaiah, they declare, "Arise, shine, for your light has dawned, for the presence of Adonai has shone upon you, and nations shall walk by your light." We're taught that the letters of the Hebrew alphabet are the building blocks of creation itself, and the Kabbalists of medieval Spain taught that poems not only depict a mystical process of union with God, they bring it into being. And we'll see a poem or two that I think were conceived in that way. I can't promise us all mystical union with God right now, but we'll see. And of course, our poetry is not all sweetness and light. One of the very first moments in which the Torah breaks into verse is that series of curses that God delivers in Genesis chapter 3 to the serpent and to Eve, and finally to Adam, saying, "Cursed shall be the ground because of you. By toil shall you eat of it all the days of your life. By the sweat of your brow shall you get bread to eat until you return to the ground, for from it you were taken. Dust you are, and to dust you shall return." Not to mention one of the greatest, to my mind, bodies of poetry in our entire tradition, the book of Job, and those long passages of lamentation and complaint and protest that Job delivers against his fate and against God. And arguments that in the end, God never answers. Sweeping them aside, really, instead, with that one of the great non sequiturs, actually, in all of literature, that return barrage of overpowering questions that God self, a poet, declares. "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Do you know who fixed its dimensions or who measured it with a line? Who set its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the divine beings shouted for joy?" And the questions go on for page after page until Job finally can only surrender with words that take us all the way back to those words from Genesis. "I had heard you with my ears, but now I see you with my eyes. Therefore, I recant and relent, being but dust and ashes." So we'll return to Job, but let's begin. And I know that a link to our poems for the evening are in the chat for you if you don't have them already at hand. Let's begin with a prayer from 12th century Spain. You'll see on this page, and the theme here really of these pieces is the way we, one of the ways in which we conceive of God and invoke God at the beginning of a synagogue service, perhaps before putting on a talit, from Psalm 104, "Oh, my soul, bless God, wrapped in light as in a garment." And just because it looks cool, I put in this visual poem. If it's readable, I don't know how to read it, but there is, from the 19th century, Solomon ben Chaim Eliashu, the primordial Torah as the cloak of God. And there it is. It's speak of arise and shine, for the light of God is upon you. There it is. And it's also at the same time as being the sun, it looks like a kind of garment you could throw over your head. So this is what Abraham Ibn Ezra, the great Spanish poet, writes. I have a garment which is like a sieve for sifting barley and wheat. In the dead of night, I spread it out like a tent, and 1,000 stars pierce it with their gleams. Sitting inside, I see the moon and the Pleiades, and on a good night, the great Orion himself. I get awfully tired of counting all the holes, which seem to me like the teeth of many saws. A piece of thread to sew up all the other threads would be, to say the least, no use. If a fly landed on it with all its weight, the little fool would hang by its foot and curse. Dear God, do what you can to mend it. Make me a mantle of praise from these poor rags. So here we have, the humbly praying Jew with something that is simultaneously the holiest, in both senses, I suppose, schmata, and the grandest thing possible, because you can see Orion and the Pleiades. Nothing is hidden. And we go all the way from the cosmic to that little idiot fly trying to balance on it and cursing the praying Jew for having such an unpresentable garment. So the high and the low all in one place. So this is a long time favorite. And I want to keep moving this. And I know many of you have seen this, but you can come back to these. I also put on the page Yehuda Amichai's great poem from his last book about putting on a tallis. And I also think of that other contemporary Jewish prophet, Leonard Cohen, who has the song Anthem that says, "There is a crack in everything. It's how the light gets in." So there we have the light. And let's go to page 2. I think of Yedid Nefesh as a poem from Sfat in the north of the Holy Land, the land of Israel, in the 16th century, as a poem that might have been conceived as a way of actually bringing about union with God. So this is something that we sing. We know this one if we've been to services. It begins, Yedid Nefesh Av Harachaman Mishuch Avdecha El Retzonecha. But we may not always pause, those of us who are not so entirely fluent in Hebrew. We might not often pause to appreciate the meaning of the words. And I don't know, I'm sorry, I don't know whose translation this is. The original Hebrew also rhymes. It's a very formal piece. But it's also a poem that calls to mind the opening of Psalm 42, which I happen to have right here, I believe. A yearning for God that the psalmist says, like a hind crying for water, my soul cries for you, O God. My soul thirsts for God, the living God. Oh, when will I come to appear before God? So we get a similar kind of yearning here. Heart's delight, source of mercy, draw your servant into your arms. I leap like a deer to stand in awe before you. Your love is sweeter to me than the taste of honey. World's light, shining glory, my heart is faint for love of you. Heal it, O God, help my heart. Show me your radiant splendor. Let me return to strength and have joy forever. Have compassion, O faithful one. Pity for your loved child. How long have I hoped to see your glorious might, O God, my heart's desire. Have pity, hold back no more. Show yourself, beloved, and cover me with the shelter of your peace. Another familiar Sabbath wish, the Sukkot Shalom. Light the world with your presence, that we may exult and rejoice in you. Hurry, lover, the holy day has come. Show us grace as long ago. And I guess I never fail to be touched by conceiving of God in these sensual terms as a lover. And I know we're not the only tradition that has this. I'm thinking of that hymn, which Reverend Metulsky could probably sing for us. Jesus, lover of my soul, let me to thy bosom fly, which is so outrageous that we can declare that, and so beautiful. Unfortunately, the reason why we have the Song of Songs in the Tanakh is that the rabbis of long ago decided, well, it's not really about two love-struck teenagers going kind of nuts in the springtime over each other. It's really about God's love for the people of Israel. It's like, great, works for me, got it into the Bible. So there we are, there's Yedid Nefesh. And then there's this other guy. My favorite of the patriarchs is on page 2 here is Jacob, and he's credited with uttering the first evening prayer. Before then, prayer was a daytime activity, as we think of it. But on a journey, he gets surprised by darkness, and what can you do but exclaim and cry out and pray, and has a vision. So here is a first evening prayer. It is possible, even in the darkness. No, it is more possible. That is when your messenger comes to me, who has walked unappearing beside me like starlight in the day, angel that lives in the dust of the earth and knows the distance of time and the terrible space between one human and another that can hardly be crossed. In the dark, the messenger cries, lift your eyes up. What I am dreaming, I am seeing, it is coming to be, and climbs a coil, a rope, a spinning ladder that is the way into day in the night. A place of God I didn't know, here at the foot of it, the root of the tree. Not for me to ascend, but to pray to you in the dark, that you have brought down the infinite to me when my head lay on a stone, one earth wheeling among the millions of your stars. Oh, and let's go to page 3, where we get to go into a slightly more argumentative mode, which is part of our people's story. So again, a great Spanish poet, this man from the 11th century, Shmuel HaNagid. He is most famous for a long, pious chain of poems called the kingdom's crown. But here's a lovely irreverent short piece that I found, and then a kind of a parallel or counterpoint by the great Grace Paley of our own time. So in the 11th century, Shmuel HaNagid wrote, "You who'd be wise should inquire into the nature of justice and evil from your teachers, seekers like yourself, and the students who question your answer." A tradition that thrives to this day. I also think of Amichai's poem where he's reflecting on the kind of sacred creeds of his youth that he's questioning now. And that poem ends, "And when they told me don't ask, I began to ask, and I have not stopped asking since." It seems to be what we do. So here's Grace Paley. A smart aleck if we ever knew one, and God bless her. This is in her very last book. She's quoting a young woman. She said, "Every sentence is an accusation." And I thought, she speaks well. That child has always known what to say about the world. She has a beautiful face, a clear head, and cosmic notions. My God, I said, you're right. That's the way it is. The world speaks to you nowadays in accusations. It doesn't leave you alone for a minute. It thinks everything is your fault. The world is like that. No, she said, I wasn't talking about the world. I was talking about you. Yes, I said, that's it. That's just what I meant. There's a little teacher and student dialogue for you. Careful how well you teach your students. They will come right back. And here are a couple of, on the right-hand column, a couple of psalmists. We know, of course, we sing this one too, Psalm 121, Esayena el Keharim, Me'ayin Yavo Ezri. I lift my eyes to the mountains. From where will my help come? I think this is my favorite psalm. My help comes from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. Adonai will not let your foot give way. Your guardian will not slumber. See, the guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. Adonai is your guardian, your protection at your right hand. By day, the sun will not strike you, nor the moon by night. Adonai will guard you from all harm. Adonai will guard your life. Adonai will guard your going and coming, now and forever. And the contemporary psalmist, Alicia Ostreicher, some of you have probably met her. We read together once at Bethel a couple of years ago when she had she and Hannah Bloch had new books out, and she visited us. Anyway, of course, as David the psalmist is often depicted as playing the harp, and so here's a kind of a rebellious psalmist. This is in a long sequence she wrote called the Volcano sequence, and it comes from a period of living and suffering and living through and surviving cancer. So in this psalm, she declares, I am not lyric anymore. I will not play the harp for your pleasure. I will not make a joyful noise to you, neither will I lament. For I know you drink lamentation too, like wine. So I dully repeat, you hurt me. I hate you. I pull my eyes away from the hills. There we have the echo of Esa Enai. I will not kill for you. I will never love you again unless you ask me. So that great tug and pull, rebellion and surrender, a bit of a reenactment of Job, perhaps. Okay, I give in, maybe. So let's turn to page 4. We have more of Amichai. I love the one in the upper left. I think we're going to pass over it at the moment in the interest of time, but you have it. It's a great one from 1967, or rather, as you might imagine, triumphant year in the state of Israel, where quite the contrary, on Yom Kippur, the speaker of this poem has a rather non-triumphalist encounter with an Arab closing up his shop for the night, closing the gates of his shop in a very Yom Kippur way. And interestingly, in the Hebrew numerology, the year 1967 is Tashcha, which also means you will forget, which is why he calls it the year of forgetting. We'll pass that one aside for now, and then another one by yours truly in the corner about his own father. But I love this short series, and I know we've read these sometimes on Yom Kippur. When I feel like we need prayer, but we also need a little lightness of being, and Amichai delivers it in these meditations on prayer, short pieces from Open, Closed, Open, again translated by Berkeley's own Hannah Bloch and Hannah Kronfeld. So I'll just read these 5. I declare with perfect faith that prayer preceded God. Prayer created God. God created human beings. Human beings create prayers that create the God that creates human beings. When God packed up and left the country, he left the Torah with the Jews. They've been looking for him ever since, shouting, "Hey, you forgot something, you forgot." And other people think shouting is the way Jews pray. The Jewish people read Torah aloud to God all year long, a portion a week, like Scheherazade, who told stories to save her life. By the time Simchat Torah rolls around, God forgets, and they can begin again. Even solitary prayer takes 2, one to sway back and forth, and the one who doesn't move is God. But when my father prayed, he would stand in his place, erect, motionless, and force God to sway like a reed and pray to him. Communal prayer. Is it better to ask, "Give us peace," with cries of woe, or to ask calmly, quietly? But if we ask calmly, God will think we don't need peace and quiet. I don't know, those may be the first and last word on prayer for me, that kind of array of circular arguments with God. The father to whom God is forced to pray. So page 5, I told you Job would come back. And here comes some protest, some outcry, because our tradition is rich with that. These are just, I'm giving you at the top of the page 2 of Job's more beautiful outcries. As I said, they really do go unanswered. So they're lasting. We return to these questions. We make these cries ourselves. In chapter 14, Job cries. And of course, he has these irritating friends surrounding him who argue back and scold him and mouth pieties, which makes Job as a poet all the more forceful. And of course, God in the end scolds the pious friends just as harshly. Anyway, there is hope for a tree. If it is cut down, it will renew itself. Its shoots will not cease. If its roots are old in the earth and its stump dies in the ground, at the scent of water it will bud and produce branches like a sapling. But mortals languish and die. Man expires. Where is he? The waters of the sea fail, and the river dries up and is parched. Some man lies down, never to rise. He will awake only when the heavens are no more, only then be aroused from his sleep. Oh, that you would hide me in Sheol, conceal me until your anger passes. Set me a fixed time to attend to me. If a man dies, can he live again? And again in chapter 17, I'm sorry, in chapter 7 in the upper right. What is man? I apologize for the maleness of this excerpt. I know there's a way around this. What is man that you make much of him, that you fix your attention upon him? You inspect us every morning, examine us every minute. Will you not look away from me for a while and let me be till I swallow my spittle? If I have sinned, what have I done to you? Watcher of humanity, why make of me your target and a burden to myself? Why do you not pardon my transgression and forgive my iniquity? For soon I shall lie down in the dust. When you seek me, I shall be gone. There's the dust again. And this conception of God as this kind of pest, stalker, nudnik that you cannot shake off. And the only way to hide is to die and lie in your own dust. That is deep, serious grief. Well, I give you a couple of contemporary poets again. In both of these cases, people who fought and succumbed to cancer, but not without having their say in wonderful, wonderful poems. And I don't know if you've heard of Abba Kovner, an Israeli poet born in Russia. He was actually a partisan in the war and one of the famous as a leader in the Vilna uprising. But anyway, late in his life, he published this last book, probably titled Sloan Kettering, but that's where he was. That's where he was for his treatment. And this is a pretty angry prayer. So get ready. Is there a prayer for one who prays like him, seething? He has offered no sacrifice, built no altar. He has not grasped the coattail of a flying angel, nor placed his trust in the mercy of heaven. Is there a prayer for one who prays like him, seething? Once he loved the lonely dweller in the sky. He remembers the day he lost patience waiting for the echo of his cry for help to come back from empty space. His prayer stand now is the nickel clothes hanger above his bag of bones, wrapped in a chilly sheet as he prays before bottles hovering like acrobats on trampolines. Is everything liquid? Is there nothing solid after the infusion? We note, of course, that this man is still praying. That's the main thing. But the prayer stand is changed. The liturgical accoutrement are now the infusion bag on a flimsy trolley. And here's Hannah Bloch in the cancer ward. This is also from her final book, depicting to me an incredible moment. I had the honor of being in a monthly poetry book with a group with Hannah, and she would bring these. One evening she brought this, cancer ward. A joy so acute it startles me. Here on this mountain pass where dangers multiply, fates with an appetite, a clearing of bright, cold-bladed air. Even here on this corridor, this slippery when wet, a clarity, as if joy required only joys to feed it. So if she had her moments of seething, which she did, this is not one of them. An unexpected joy. And this is, how are we doing? We're gonna make it. And just because I love her so, this is the very last poem in Grace Paley's book. She has this conversational way. Of course, you may know her short story. She's most famous for her great, great short stories. But she has this conversational style in her poems where I feel like I'm going for a walk with her and she's confiding something. Walking in the woods. That's when I saw the old maple, a couple of its thick arms cracked, one arm reclining half rotted into earth, black with the delicious hospitality of rot to the littlest creatures. The hospitality of rot, okay? The tree not really dying, living less widely. Green head high above the other leaf-crowded trees. A terrible stretch to sun, just to stay alive. But if you've liked life, you do it. Another moment of joy. So, I don't know if you know him. I just have two more poems, and then we're gonna turn it over to you. I don't know if you know this guy, a Yiddish language poet, born in Poland, but came to the US as a young man, continued to write in Yiddish, Yaakov Glatstein. And I love this one. This was mostly translated by the poet Ruth Whitman. But because I like to tinker with other people's translations, I'm taking partial blame here. But this is a wonderful kind of entrance to Shabbat prayer that I'm glad to introduce to you if you don't know it. And again, the confiding tone, the brotherly, comradely embrace of this opening. I'll let you in on a secret about praying the sunset prayer. It's a luscious bit of praying, like strolling on grass. Nobody's chasing you. Nobody hurries you. You walk toward your creator with gifts in clean, empty hands. The words are golden. Their meaning is transparent. It's as though you're saying them for the first time. If you don't catch on that you should feel a little levitated, you're not praying the sunset prayer. The tune is simplicity itself. You're just lending a helping hand to the sinking day. It's quite a responsibility. You take a created day and you slip it into the archives of a life where all our lived out days are lying together. The day is departing with a quiet kiss. It lies at your feet while you stand saying the blessings. You didn't create it, but you can lead the day to its end. You can watch the smile of its going down. See how whole it is, not diminished for a second, how you age with the days that keep dawning, how you offer your lived out day as a gift to eternity. That's the sunset prayer. All right, and on page 7, the rabbi asked me to close with this. So, oh, look at this thing. So this is a form. I love forms. I love inventing forms. I love playing with forms. I love having, it's kind of Houdini-like, having a straight jacket I've got to operate in. So the idea here, and it goes with the theme of counting, each line, each succeeding line has one more syllable than the one before. So I just started doing this when I was like, oh, God, how long can I go on? Where's this going to stop? So I gave myself 36, a nice Jewish number, 36 lines, double high, and then it stops. Anyway, it's a poem. It's a prayer poem. I said we would begin and end with prayer. And there's, in the middle of it, there is a story lifted straight from the Talmud. It's so outrageous you couldn't possibly make it up. And our friend Job will appear because he just does in my writing, in my prayer life. So this is called Counting. What if I, this moment, were only prayer? Not a thought or word of one, nor even an intention. Sunlight on grass, nothing of itself but what it shows, or a bird that is called out, filled with purest hearing. Well, I have the prayers in the book, and once again I have lost my place, dreaming even past the prayer that calls on me to listen up. Must I start it all over, and where would I begin? How far into the past would I unwind? How far would a self have to cast itself out before it flew beyond its reaches to live instead of being only lived in? Oh, it's like asking to stop breathing. In the time I've spent worrying, the sun turned all to shadow. It began to rain. The scent of the mown grass lifted into the trees, and now the light and shade have returned to their places a little further on, in accordance with the number of moments that have passed. Rabbi Hia, called the Great, once said, I have never in my life prayed with intention. One time I tried to intend, but only wondered in my heart whether I would be received before the king or sent into exile. How was I to know? This, of course, started the other rabbis talking. Rabbi Samuel admitted with a shrug, I've been counting chickens. Rabbi Bun, the son of Hia, said, I have been counting the layers of stone in the wall. And his eyes lit up with this woeful confession. Rabbi Matania sighed, since there is always one who feels responsible for the prayers of all the rest, then let there be blessings on our heads. For I have noticed that whenever we come to the last of the benedictions at which we are commanded to bow down, our heads are bowed of their own accord. But look, I must have nodded off again, enumerating, losing track of what I meant to praise, drool on my shirt, or else have had a dream with none to interpret it. Will you not look away from me a while, as Job cried out, and let me be whilst I swallow my own spit? The rain has started falling again, even in the path of the sun, as if there's no reason to decide which will be first or last, and a great round of song is circling among the uppermost branches of the spruces. Return to me, O God, and I'll return, letting the day begin again, even if it's halfway gone, extolling the one who removes the sleep from my eyes, the slumber from my eyelids, and gives the rooster discernment to tell day from night. Let me count the threads of you that I might tug at, complicated by being many, simple by being one. And if not, to arrive at wanting nothing, which is another desire, then to yearn for what is given, including the dust and the ash, and the last moment you have counted up for me, wherefore I clap my hand unto my mouth. Thank you, everyone.
Dan, thank
And
you.
we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We're not done with you yet. Don't go away. There's some questions and comments coming. But before we move into that segment, I did not earlier want to recognize and welcome that Rabbi Kahn's brother David has joined us from Philadelphia. And we want to welcome David and other people who have joined, not only from the Berkeley community, but in some cases from around the country, to be with us tonight. How we plan to proceed now is that I think Rabbi Kahn, you may have some comments, and following that, we'll have opportunities to come back to you, Dan, and offer you some questions and comments from the chat, including an opportunity to hopefully revisit a poem that you skipped over, one of yours, Practice, if you want to turn back to that one. And then for people who can stay and want to ask your questions or make comments here in the moment, we'll have an opportunity to do that as well. So Rabbi Kahn, I think you're up next.
Right.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I also want to say with my brother and myself both remarked on having a poetry session is a very important way to honor our parents, our mother in particular, and the fact that included Jacob Gluckstein, a Yiddish poet. Dan would also make her very happy. And I just also want to just appreciate some other people who are here, in particular, Mark Maxwell, who's here from Boston. Not only is he the president of Temple Israel in Boston, where I first trained, it's also his birthday today. And so, Mark, thank you for taking time on your birthday to be with us. Thank you so much, Dan. I think other people can appreciate how blessed I am in my life. One way of looking at this is to speak about poetry, or this poetry, as midrash, because midrash is always where we are in dialogue with the classic or the original texts and stories. And there's an important book by Daniel Boyarin in which he talked about the idea of intertextuality in midrash. And then earlier people talk about intertextuality in the Bible itself. For example, I actually, till Dan mentioned this evening, had not noticed that Job is invoking the creation story of Adam in his remarks, which one is in dialogue with itself. And one of the things I like about all these texts, one of the reasons that we brought them, our whole idea of the facing page, is that sometimes these texts that we bring reference or hint at or in dialogue with a historical sacred text, and some of the time they are in agreement, and sometimes they are a response or an answer back again. I just want to suggest that the Grace Paley poem about I imagine it as a mother and a daughter, but it doesn't have to be that way in that conversation, about how it's you I'm talking about, you. In our new Reform Haggadah, which also, by the way, features another poem of Dan's, by the way, is placed on the page opposite the second child at Passover, the disobedient, rebellious, not so behavioral one. And this one's sort of talking back to the parents. And it's a place where the poetry comes along today, even as the Times does historically, or in the prophets as well. The prophets do this as well, sometimes in the Haftarah, where the Haftarah, another source of poetry, is a counter argument, a counter discussion. I talked about this. Those of you I know were all in attendance, have perfect memory, just this last Shabbat, about the Haftarah and the Torah portion being in dialogue and opposition to each other, as opposed to other places where what we read is going to support or nurture or deepen our understanding of the text, which is my understanding of the Jacob poem. Now, the Jacob story, in which there is a ladder going from earth to heaven, is an allusion to a universal folkloric motif, which is axis mundi, the axis of the world, the tree, the ladder. In some native cultures, you sometimes have the ladder that goes through the smoke, and the hole in the ceiling going in and out is through the smoke to the roof to get up there as well. But also every culture has some sort of ladder. I just feel like that poem, Dan's poem there around, makes me feel that more deeply. I just want to mention that we didn't read it tonight, but Dan has another poem for that same Torah portion about climbing the Stairmaster, endlessly trying to get all the way up to heaven at the gym and sort of being made fun of by the healthy young people who are standing outside on the street. A word or two about a couple of the other poems, and then I want to just open it up to questions and comments. We read Yedi Nefesh in English.
The
in
healthy young
Hebrew,
people smoking cigarettes
yes,
are making fun of.
in Hebrew, Yedi Nefesh has the letters, the first letter of each of the 4 stanzas are Yud, He, Vav, He, spelling the name Adonai. And in the mystical imagination on Shabbat, the Yah and the Va are united together. So I want to mention just a quick plug. That's going to be the theme of Nancy Flam's talk on Saturday afternoon, is how the unity of God, as it were, making God one. That this prayer is about, in part, we don't have to know that to appreciate it. But also I want to say about one of the things that I appreciate about that particular poem also is some of you heard me say, if you just take the Hebrew Bible and put it in the Cuisinart and press pulse, then you have the material for all of later Jewish literature. And so the poem itself is such an anthology of little snippets of phrases. Every single phrase in the poem is actually a biblical expression or allusion that are all assembled together into this pastiche. We had a series of poems about cancer and death, and I just wanted to draw your attention to the last one from Grace Paley, which was an uplifting poem, even in a hope poem, even in the face of all this. And I wanted to ask you to think about that in contrast to the very nice poem that we read about the tree in the forest before the Kaddish, and the animals come in the spring. And this poem was a little rawer, a little more challenging. And this is one of our questions that we're always wrestling with, that Dan is always up against. I ask for a poem, I say, oh no, that's too, I know I want irreverent, but not that irreverent, or I want to push things, but not that pushy or whatever else, and find that middle ground. And that's one of the things I'm grateful for you, Dan, is helping us find things that sort of work for us. But also, like, where do we have room? Do we have an anthology in the back for more things that are even a little tougher and a little more challenging? That's been one of our goals, I want to say, at Bethel, is to make space for all of who we are, and not everything we say in our sanctuary always has to be nice. Also, and then with the Chana Bloch poem, above it, and it was maybe a different Chana Bloch I was thinking about, but I wanted to say this, there was a movement, there was a twist for me. Dan said, a lot of these were prayer poems, not all, but first of all, I was reading these poems as Midrash. I was reading the Jacob poem as Midrash. I was reading the first Grace Paley from the Passover Seder one that I think about as a Midrash poem. And then we move into these prayer poems. And prayer also, I want to say, why do we keep the texts that we have? The texts we have, and Kathy Stevens, if you're here, this was not on the list. I realized you had to stop at 13, and I was very impressed with Kathy, the 13 you came up with, but no one said this about, you came to shul more, you guys, if you came to the sanctuary, you'd hear this more often. That's what I was going to say, Kathy. Anyway, though, that prayer sometimes gives us voice in the words to what we wanted to say, but we didn't have the words to discover ourselves yet. Sometimes we find that, oh, I wish I'd said that, or that captures me what I wanted to be saying or carry. And sometimes the poems are not our words, not what we want our words, but open us up. And so we try and map ourselves and say, oh, I don't think I could ever say that. But what could I say? What would my prayer be instead? And finally, I want to wrap up so other people can have a chance to talk about the counting poem, which is, it's like honestly, Dan's poems are like Torah portions. It's really my favorite. But I like it so much. It works on so many different levels. Just a couple things that not everyone knows about this. There is a question in the poem about where should I go back to? There's a lengthy discussion in the halacha on the Mishnah about if your Amidah is interrupted, Where do you have to go back to and start over again? What is the correct place? There's a discussion in the poem about the greeting the king and the exile. There's a whole halachic discussion in the Mishnah about, do you interrupt your prayer to greet someone? Oh, no, you don't. You're talking to God. But what if the king comes along? Well, God's more important than the king, but the king's kind of got political power over you. Don't get yourself killed by not greeting the king when you're supposed to, et cetera, around this. And this whole discussion then about kavanah. What's it mean to have kavanah, to have intention in our prayer rather than just reciting the words? Rabbi Wolf of Zitamar says, if you're praying the Amidah and you stop to think, how does my body posture look to the person who is standing in the row behind me? This is idolatry. And so I want to suggest that this poem is then in dialogue or in conversation with that Hasidic teaching. On the theme of counting, we're always trying to get to the deeper and deeper understanding, to deeper awareness, deeper, and we're never quite there, but we're always trying to get there. So on the theme of counting, I just want to say my gratitude to you, Dan, and for all of us who've been on this project together of trying to get there, that we are moving effort to try and get to Sinai again, to this place of deep connection where it all holds together, it all makes sense, we really understand it. So we are approaching Sinai and we count our days towards Sinai. So I'm going to conclude my section now by inviting you to count the Omer with me. And just because I can and have room, I'm going to stand up, though you don't have to. It's not convenient for you. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al sfirat ha'omer, hayom arba'im yamim la'omer, shehem sheva. No, Chamesh Shavuot v'Chamesh Yamim la'Omer. Today is the 40th day of the Omer, which makes for 5 weeks and 5 days. And according to Mike's count, there are 9 days to Sinai. Thank you, everyone. Susan, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you again, Dan. I'll share just a couple of the many tributes to you, Dan, here from the chat. People are thanking you for your musical, magical voice, your interpretations, you're commenting on your selections, on what value added it is for all of us to hear the poetry, to have you be the vehicle to bring this poetry to us. So we thank you for that. I hope later you'll have a chance to read these comments in the chat. That was just a little digest.
Thank you.
A couple of questions came up, one specific to Alicia Ostreicher's poem. A question from Sarah. Why do you think she includes this line, I will not kill for you again?
I take it as her reflection on the many religious wars we've been through. Ostreicher herself, having gone through a turbulent time of living in Israel herself, and then leaving. I don't know if she had a particular war or commandment to kill in mind. The Torah, alas, is full of such commandments. When we enter the promised land, we're supposed to annihilate them all. The ones who are living there at the moment. But I don't know, so I can't entirely answer that for her.
Maybe I can turn to you a question about your own poem. Catherine Haynes has commented that practice is one of her favorites, happens to be one of my favorites as well. And since we all are here and would love to hear more from you, I wonder if you would like to read that for us and also share anything you would like about background. You mentioned I'm interested in your process So you mentioned in the counting poem, there's a process that has to do with a form that you had committed yourself to. And I'm curious how a poet, what's the process, if you remember, behind practice?
Hmm.
Turn it back to you.
I remember this one very well. I was in the thick of writing poems, sort of keyed closely or pretty tangentially in at different times with a weekly portion. This, of course, ended up becoming the title poem of that book. I was writing some things in form. I was writing a bunch of sonnets. I wrote a whole war diary during the Iraq War in sonnets, and I call it Book of Numbers, a very warlike book of the Torah. But this one, it was my father's seventh yard site. And the Parsha that week from Deuteronomy said, every seventh year, you shall practice remission of debts. So I thought, oh, brother, okay. Here's my task. What does that practice mean? So this one felt a little forced upon me, like I had to write this one. So it's a sonnet, 14 lines, rhymes, loosely or firmly at different moments. Practice. How simple it ought to be to practice compassion on someone gone, even love him, long as he's not right there in front of me. For I turned to address him, as I do, and saw that no one's lived in that spot for quite some time. Oh, turner away of prayer. Not much of a god, but he was never meant to be. For a seventh time I light him a candle. An entire evening and morning it burns, not a light to see by, more a reminder of light, a remainder, in a glass with a prayer on the label and a barcode from the store. How can he go on? He can't. Then let him pass away. He gave what light he could. What more will I claim? What debt of grace he doesn't owe? If I forgive him, he is free to go. Big if, you might say, but there it is, the practice.
Thank you so much. Like many poems, the best ones, each of us may find our own way in and through the practice as well. I think that's why it's a particularly wonderful one.
Thank you. And as Yoel was suggesting, and I've implanted this idea in his head, poems are pretty subversive. It's challenging to find poems that are really going to be of liturgical use in a steady, ongoing way, because, of course, poems deal in ambiguities and multiple meanings, and they can undermine conventional ways of conceiving of a question or of the world. So poems cause trouble, good trouble, I hope, in the John Lewis terms, but, they're a little rambunctious. So that's part of my job.
That's the protest part of tonight's protest. So there are a couple of other questions from the chat. And then those of you who might have a question in your mind or comment you'd like to share, we're going to ask you, if possible, to find the electronic hand on Zoom, which, at least on my screen, is at the bottom of the list of participants. For some of you, it might be accessible through a little icon at the bottom of your screen that says reactions. If you can raise an electronic, we have two more questions from the chat. And then after that, Catherine Resnick and I will be watching for those electronic hands, or failing that, it's also okay to raise a hand through the screen and we'll try to look for you. So Dan, the two final questions I'm seeing from, and I'm going to give you them both. One is quite personal and one is more I guess, on the professional end. And you can decide what order to answer them in and whether to answer them. The professional one, we have a question from Michelle about how you keep track of poems that relate to each other, that go well together. If you have some sort of files or notebooks, and to make a kind of presentation where you did these groupings tonight. And the other one also has to do with connections. It's much more personal, is if you would care to share with us how you and Yoel met, and whether you connected through Judaism, or one of you brought the other one more into this idea of Judaism, Jewish practice. So I'll turn it back to you to answer, if you're going to keep either or both of those questions.
Okay, thanks. And here's another instance where I love to invoke Amichai, who described himself as a man with none of the answers, but all of the questions. Anyway, I will just comment briefly that Yoel and I met at a conference for anti-sexist men. You can't make this up. In 1981 in Boston. And let's just say I was a wanderer, bamidbar. I was, I had Jewish friends. I was seeking. I knew something of Judaism, but here was this rabbinic student. So anyway, yes, and some years later, when it had become something I wanted to do, and not just because I was involved with a rabbi, I formally converted to Judaism and had a bar mitzvah at the bright young age of 49. And so we've had a, well, and talk about a biblical number. We've been, wandering together for 40 years. So the other one, oh, Michelle, if only I had an archive. No, I belong in the 19th century. I am, technological only because I have to be. You're looking at my archive. So Yoel can attest that for the past few weeks, the dining room table has been piled high with books, where I've just, and folders of papers that I have just kind of happily been searching and playing around and looking for old friends and finding some new ones, actually. There were some things in this packet by poets I knew, but poems I didn't know that well. So I made some discoveries too. So no, I have no quick and easy file. It's a great big mess, but I kind of like it that way. It took a long time, but I had fun, and I hope it resulted in a gathering of poems that live together. So, and there are many more. So, stick around for the year-long course.
It made a beautiful, I don't know, mixed bouquet or fruit salad.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful array.
And I do believe in the mix. Yeah.
I've also heard it said that nothing a poet does is ever wasted. I bet nothing that you've read, it's all percolates in there.
Mm.
I'm going to ask Catherine if you're seeing raised hands, because I've been talking with Dan and not looking for those raised hands.
I am going to the gallery and seeing if I see Sharon Friedman has her hand up. And so Sharon, if you would unmute.
Hi, Sharon.
I'm unmuting. Can you hear me? I have I'm on the road. I'm on a road trip and I have a really unstable internet connection.
I can hear you.
This is really fun. This is like Ask the Poet. And I was one of the people who wrote in the comments that it was so meaningful to hear you read poems. To hear you read the poems puts an imprint in my ears. I'm poems are meant to be heard, and now I hear the ones that you read. So I love that. How do you read poems? When you pick up a book of poetry, how do you read it from cover to cover? Do you like jump around and then that makes you think of something else and you put it down and you go to a different book? Are you like looking for, how do you read poetry? I'm just, I have books of poetry and I don't always know how to use them.
There's no right or wrong way, and I'm not consistent. I read poems out loud. I like to hear them. As I'm writing, I have to keep reading drafts out loud. I have to hear it. The sound is absolutely essential to me to get the rhythm right. I have to do it out loud. Reading the same way. I want to hear what someone is doing, what kind of sounds they make. And I guess when I encounter a book for the first time, a book of poetry, if it's a volume by one author, I'll go start to finish, because I put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into ordering my books. And so I figure they did too. So I'm interested in their ordering of things. But once they become friends, I'm just, I jump around. And anthologies and things, sure, I just jump and explore. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like standing in a bookstore and looking at the table of contents. And this one is, oh, here's a poem where Allen Ginsberg imagines he runs into Walt Whitman in the supermarket. I'll read that one first. That's what I did when I first encountered the book Howl in my hometown at the bright age of 17. Sure, just jump in.
Thanks, Dan. I think that might be a good place for us to begin to wrap this up. I love the way we went from the very specific out to the general. Thank you for the good question, Sharon. Seems like a good way to finish up. I do want to again thank everyone who attended today and encourage you to tune in again, join us again, find your seat again for these next the remaining two speakers in this series. It's in the Bethel bulletin and the links, but I will remind you that this Saturday, 2 days from now at 3 p.m., Rabbi Nancy Flam, who's the founder of the Bay Area Jewish Center and the Institute for Jewish Spirituality, I think in New York, and her topic will be praying for the needs of the Shekhinah, renewing petitionary prayer. And then again, the following day on Sunday afternoon, May 9th at 4 p.m. And I want to welcome, by the way, is Reverend Jim still on the?
Yes,
Reverend
yes,
Jim
he is.
Yes, thank you for joining us. Reverend Jim Metulsky will be speaking to us on Sunday. And the title of his talk is The Book of AIDS, HIV, AIDS, and COVID-19, very timely, Comparative Spirituality Practices. So please, we all hope to see you again then. And thanks again to Rabbi Khan. Those of us who are hosting may stay on for a few more minutes and people can feel free to chat informally, unmute yourselves if you like. And those who are ready to move on to the rest of their evening, go with our blessings.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Beautiful.
So glad we're here.
Thank you, Dan.